commercializing technology. Everything from the National Cancer Institute, where she led the development center with SBIR, the Science and Technology Policy Fellow, which brings a lot of things that what's really needed in a lot of these programs, and the questions you have is good policy feedback and innovation. She's also worked within medicine and startup groups, and now is with us under John Williams, an SBA, who's the director for the SBIR program. With that, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Shieh.
Thank you. Thank you to NASA for holding this, and I really appreciate the invitation and opportunity to speak with all of you. So I saw Joseph asked you how familiar you were with the SBIR and STTR programs and how many had participated. So I'm going to get a little bit more nuanced here. How many of you have actually participated in the SBIR STTR programs specifically with NASA already? Okay, so good number of you. How about other agencies? Okay, excellent. So what I'm going to be covering is really the 50,000-foot level view of the SBIR and STTR programs. Since it seems a number of you are fairly familiar, I may speak a little bit more quickly just to get to be able to answer your questions that maybe are going to get more in depth, and you're going to pepper me with hard questions about the award limit sizes. But hopefully, but I'm going to make sure that we all get on the same page, because there are still a number of you who might be fresh and new to this program. And I was excited to hear about Tabby's work with the Office of Small Business Programs there. So just to make sure that we are all on the same page. Oh, so this is just dead, and so maybe I'm going to need to advance the slides. Next slide. Can we advance? Yeah, I know. Or is somebody else controlling this now? So just to make sure that we're all on the thing, go back 3. There we go. Excellent. I'll just wave to the mysterious ether here. So overall, the mission of the SBIR and STTR programs is supporting scientific excellence and technological innovations. It's here to support you using your U.S. federal taxpayer dollars to solve the wicked problems that we have in the U.S. and the world while building a strong national economy. Next slide. The Small Business Innovation Research Program, SBIR, specifically is a set-aside program for small businesses to engage in R&D. And so, Tabby gave that big picture, and as Jen mentioned in the Q&A, that's all for the entire agency, and then SBIR is a portion of this. And so it's 3.2% for SBIR of the federal R&D dollars that are going outside of an agency. And what that really amounts to, for what you care about, right, is it's about $2.2 billion across the federal government that's set aside for small businesses each year. Next slide.
Can you give that remote a try again?
Sure. Excellent, thank you. So the Small Business Technology Transfer Program is a sibling program. It's a parallel program that specifically aims to facilitate the cooperation between nonprofit R&D institutions and small businesses. And that is 0.45% of the extramural R&D budget for agencies, for a specific set of agencies. And I'll get more into sort of the differences between SBIR and STTR. But the STTR program is specifically about $290 million set aside each year, and it's a subset of the 11 different federal agencies that take part in the SBIR program. So I'm going to go through the congressionally required goals of the SBIR and STTR program so you get that high-level view of what is it that we're trying to do here. One is meeting federal R&D needs. We're trying to increase private sector commercialization of the innovation that's funded from federal R&D dollars, stimulate technological innovation. We want to support you and your innovations to get out there. We especially want to foster and encourage participation in innovation by everybody. Everybody there are wonderful ideas and innovations can come from everywhere, and we want to make sure that's happening. And then specifically for STTR, it's about fostering that cooperative R&D happening coming out of universities and nonprofit research institutions. But the real reason why we work on America's Seed Fund, right, is that it's really because we want to be we are here at the front row seat to the future where you are innovating, and we want to see you become get your innovations out there like these companies that were all SBIR funded. Made in Space is just right next door, actually. I saw their office. So, but you know, we want your companies also to become household names, your innovations to make it out there and really make an impact in the world. So to get us all on the same page about sort of the phases in the process, and what I'm talking about here is this is true across all 11 federal agencies that have an SBIR and STTR program. So phase 1 is concept development and feasibility. It's generally 6 months to a year's worth of work, and the guidance is for $150,000 with a maximum of about $225,000. Generally then, after you get that proof of concept feasibility, you apply for phase 2 funding, which is more prototype development, further R&D for 2 years, and about the guidance is generally $1 million for that 2 years, and can go up to $1.5 million. And then, you know, magically commercialization. So phase 3 is not SBIR funding, but it is an SBIR stage. And what that is actually another place where you can start interacting again with the OSBP. So if you're still a small business, after you get your phase 1 and 2 award, that was the competitive process that you went through. So phase 3, you can start using non-SBIR dollars, right? Some of that other billions of dollars that are available to go to small businesses to continue R&D work, or to have your technology procured by an agency. So who qualifies? You know, what's the eligibility? You do have to be an organized for-profit U.S. business with 500 or fewer employees. And that sounds like a lot, but I would say the typical profile of an SBIR STTR awardee is a little bit more like, so 95% of the companies have fewer than 100, and most of them are kind of in the 20 or fewer range. The work has to be done in the US, and the company has to be more than 50% US owned and operated. So that's the company eligibility. Who makes a good principal investigator? And what are the requirements there? So first off, the PI has to be, for SBIR, primarily employed by the small business itself. And I mentioned, you know, for STTR, we're encouraging partnering with a research institution. And so with STTR, the principal investigator could be primarily employed by that partner and research institution. And this is at the time of award, not necessarily at the time of application. But really, you know, that's the requirement about the PI. And then it comes to evaluating the abilities of that PI to run and manage the project itself. So really it's about having that appropriate expertise. You're not required to have a PhD or an MD to manage that project, but you need to show and demonstrate you as the PI or have the right background to successfully take the project forward. So I mentioned, I've been talking a little bit about SBIR and STTR a little in the same breath, but there are obviously some differences. And the main difference, what distinguishes SBIR from STTR, is that the STTR program requires that the small business partners with a nonprofit research institution, often a university. But the SBIR program doesn't prevent it and certainly allows partnering, and it's a fairly common practice. The other piece, and maybe a common reason why somebody might choose the STTR program over SBIR, is about where the principal investigator is located. And so I just mentioned the requirements around the principal investigator, and so this is also sort of a decision point. You know, what's the right thing for your business ownership and management structure and the budget requirements? So work requirements for the STTR program, there's a requirement that based on the budget, usually 40% of the work has to be done by the small business. 30% has to be done by the research institution partner, but then that leaves 30% that could go to either the small business or the research institution partner or a third-party subcontractor. So there's a little bit more flexibility in the STTR in terms of the percentage of the budget if you're working very closely with a research institution of that funding to go to that partner. With SBIR for phase 1, the maximum you can subcontract will be 33%, and for phase 2, it's 50%. So another obvious difference between the SBIR and STTR programs, as I mentioned before, is just the size of the overall programs. So SBIR is a requirement for agencies to set aside 3.2% of their budget, and so that was about $2.25 billion across the government in FY15. And STTR, it was 0.45%. There's also a rule about if your company is majority owned by venture capital, that you can participate in the SBIR program, but not in the STTR program. And then finally, because of the program size, the number of agencies that participate in SBIR is 11, while only 5 of those agencies, the largest 5, including NASA, participate in STTR. And just a reminder, again, even though we allow partnering and require it in the STTR program, the small business is always going to be the applicant and the awardee and responsible for the award itself. So I'd asked earlier, if people have been involved with other agencies, just, if you don't mind, just kind of shout out some of the agency names that you have been involved in. NASA, DOD, NOAA, DARPA. Okay, we've got a lot of. So here I'm showing you kind of at the top level, actually, the agencies that participate in SBIR here in, it looks black, it's kind of dark blue, and STTR, the 5 largest agencies are in orange. So Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Health and Human Services, NASA, and the National Science Foundation are the largest 5. And I'll just go to the budget slide because, who doesn't want to know more about the money? And so this is organized by the size of the program. So as I mentioned, in FY15, the overall SBIR and STTR programs were about $2.5 billion. That was available specifically for small businesses doing R&D. The Department of Defense is about half of that. And some people were mentioning, DARPA or Navy. So Department of Defense, of course, is made up of multiple pieces. Just the same way that NASA, as we heard, has different centers that have different priority areas. I come from, my background is from the Health and Human Services side at the National Institutes of Health, where there's 27 different institutes and centers. So these are large pots of money, but then it's really helpful to understand individually where you might fit within a particular agency. And so I think that's something that I'm going to highlight here, which is with whatever you're working on, there are likely to be multiple agencies that are looking or where your technology could fit and be funded. And one of the things that's important to know is just sort of how to identify which agency might be appropriate and then how do they function. So this is also color-coded separately by grants versus contracts. So NASA provides funding through a contract mechanism, and you're going to hear a lot more in detail about how NASA's SBIR and STTR program works next. But I'm just going to do sort of the high-level contrast between the contracting agencies, which tend to put out specific topics. So they have problems that they need solving and want your innovations to apply to those particular topics. The agencies that are listed in green provide funding through a granting mechanism, which is really more of an assistance mechanism. And so more of those agencies, the Health and Human Services, the National Science Foundation, U.S. Department of Agriculture, are much more open-ended in terms of they're looking for your great ideas as it relates just generally to the mission of their agencies. So at NIH and the Health and Human Services, if you were working on anything to improve human health and in the biomedical space, that is just, you should just propose your idea. So it's a little bit more open-ended in that sense. So I'll leave it at that. So where can you figure out what agency might be right for you? And in general, if it's the technologies you're working on probably are maybe platform technologies that have applications in multiple areas. If you come to SBIR.gov, if you leave with nothing else, go to SBIR.gov. There's a section called I'm an Applicant that can help guide you through some of the initial steps for applying to the SBIR program and figuring out what you need to do that's true across all of the agencies. The other thing I really want to point out is that at wherever you're located, so I'm guessing that the majority of you might be actually here in the Bay Area or on the West Coast, but I know that many of you are watching virtually. If you go to state services, you'll be able to find more specific help. And Tabby actually had pointed out a number of SBA resources that you can go to talk to more in depth about your project. So where do you begin? How do you figure out what agency might be a good fit for the innovation that you're working on? The first place is to look at the funding topics that are posted. So if you go to SBIR.gov, there's a funding section, and all of the agency topics and funding opportunities are collected there. So you can search for which agencies are specifically looking for what you're working on. The other great place to go on our website on SBIR.gov is to look at past awards, because what's better than knowing where they actually spent their money. So agencies can say, we're interested in these particular topics, but you can get a better, more in-depth sense of what they've funded in the past and what agencies have funded things that might be similar to what you're working on through the past award searches. So SBIR.gov is a useful business intelligence database as well. So this is another place where you could find potential competitors, but also collaborators. And then individual agencies frequently have their own award databases as well, but this is a place to look across all of them. The other big resource we have on SBIR.gov are online tutorials. So we understand the government is hard to navigate and very bureaucratic. Some of it we're trying to fix, internally. It's slow, but we're trying. But in the meantime, the best, at the least that we can do is provide you information on how to navigate that bureaucratic world, right? And so we have a number of online tutorials on, if you go to resources, you'll see the tutorials that cover a wide variety of information. So from just agency introductions to more specifically, what are the SBIR and STTR data rights and what should you know about them? And again, I'm going to highlight connecting to your network of local support. So if you are based here in the Northern California region, there's a San Francisco district office, and a representative from the SBA district office is going to be here tomorrow. So I strongly encourage you, if you're here, to talk to Noah tomorrow. But if you're not here, you can find your local SBA district office on the SBA website, and also reach out to a number of resource centers so that can provide counseling support, counseling in the sense of, just advisory mentoring for support, such as the SCORE business mentors, the small business development centers. They're generally very connected with all the types of resources that you might need to find. And so, and the other piece of this is myself, and I'm gathering many of you are probably coming from the technical side, right? You're the scientist or engineer. You may not necessarily have the business background to understand what you need to do about structuring the accounting systems or setting up different issues around the business side of things. And so the SBA is going to be an excellent resource for that piece of it. For the technical questions, you probably do want to reach out more directly to the agencies for support and figuring out if your particular project is a good fit for that agency. I want to mention the SBIR Road Tour, especially for our friends who are listening virtually, because if you're in the Midwest, in July, we actually literally have a bus full of program managers from all the different agencies come meet one-on-one for the day, give talks, and get more in depth about all the different agencies. NASA has been a great supporter of this and has come on the road tours. So this is an opportunity, if you're not here right now, to also set up a one-on-one meeting. And we'll actually be back here in NASA Ames in September. So this is my contact information. Please do feel free to reach out. I guess let me just also give a sense of what can I actually help you with. Because so at SBA, I don't have money. I do not have the money. Don't ask me for awards because I no longer have that. So the agencies are the ones that actually do the funding. If you have questions though about specific policies that apply across all the agencies, that's what my role is. And I very much welcome feedback about how the program across the board is working for you. And I'm listening to the Q&A when people are talking about the you know, the variety of, and challenges in registrations and all of that. So don't feel unheard. We are listening, but it does take a while. So I'm going to leave the rest of the time now for Q&A. You want to start with it?
We don't have any questions, virtual questions yet.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. One thing that has plagued me as a SBIR and STTR applicant, as a very young business, it's 11 months old, that has never done anything and has only one person, but you know, just wants to innovate and all those amazing things that is the point of the program, is a cost guidance. There's no information online, or at least no easily available information to prepare a cost proposal. I do not know what my G&A rate is. I don't even know what G&A is. And at the end, you spend so much time and so much effort putting a cost proposal, almost as much time as the actual technical proposal, and then you kind of feel bad about it. It's like, that's not true. I have no idea what will I be spending in a few months. And plus, this is a fixed firm price contract where it doesn't really matter what I do with the money as long as I deliver the product. So would you consider, from all the statistics that you have in the SBA of other small businesses producing cost proposals, putting out some more guidelines on what do you expect, not necessarily fix some rates like they do with the profit fee, that 7%, I'll go right, 7%, if you say so, but just some help from the perspective of the true small business that has never done it. He's just an engineer with a PhD in his living room coming up with an idea that doesn't know what overhead means.
Yeah, so no, I greatly appreciate that question. And one of the things that's very challenging, I think, to navigate on the SBIR program is that it varies quite a bit between agencies. So, and in terms of just where do you start? So some of the resources actually, so one, yes, I think we're working actively on trying to get better information out there. If you're talking about NASA, I think you're going to hear a lot more about how to put together a cost proposal today? This afternoon, yes. But the procurement technical assistance centers, I think it's also about trying to connect to people who have done it before, because I think there is a limit to, we know what our rules are and we can educate people about those specifics, but at the same time, there's nothing better than to talk to somebody who's actually had to do it themselves. And so connecting with your fellow innovators here, as well as the networks of local support, so the procurement technical assistance centers specifically to deal with and understand government contracting and what the definitions are, but as well as the small business administration district offices, because that's something that they are very involved in, is trying to help people who are new to the government understand that process.
Excuse me. I went to the roadshow outside of D.C., National Harbor, last year. And to answer the gentleman's question, they were talking about once you propose at 135, 150,000, putting multiples of 1.8, 2.5 on top of that cost to cover not just fees, G&A, and all your other associated costs. Now, what I would recommend is that if you have questions like that, go to the roadshow, because they explain the details in the roadshow. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen this afternoon, to tell you the truth. But I was like, whoa, it's not just a 10% fee. When you add fee, G&A, and other overhead costs, you can get your 150K up to twice that. I can't explain it. I'm an engineer too, so I don't do cost proposals. But I do want to ask you one other question is that somebody said 135K for a 6-month SBIR phase 1, and you said up to 150.
Yeah, so the legislation and guidance for SBIR and STTR across the federal government, the guidelines are 150,000 total costs, indirect direct costs, indirect direct costs, indirect direct costs. Balance, I would say it gets down to the review and what it is each agency is looking for. So if you're talking about NASA specifically, I don't know if Jen is coming up to actually answer that. Excellent. But I would say review has a lot to do with it.
Well, and I would say also, wow, this is super loud.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't introduce myself. Jeez, I didn't introduce myself the last time. Jen Gustetic, I'm the program exec at program executive at NASA headquarters. You'll see a lot more of me tomorrow and the next day. Today, I'm kind of more just observing and around to talk to all of you. But to answer the question on how do small businesses compete against the big businesses, that's actually one of the reasons why SBIR exists. So back in 1982, when they authorized the program, it was a small business set-aside research and development program that is a percentage of overall extramural R&D. So small businesses are only competing against other small businesses for research and development work, and that there is a place, there is a slice of the pie, if you will, for small businesses to be able to compete to do technology development and research and development work at the early stage, at the ideas and kind of prototyping stage, where you're just being you're just submitting along with your peers being other companies under 500 people. But it's one of the reasons why the program was set up in the first place. And in fact, the US is one of the very few countries in the world that even has something like a small business set aside for research and development for that class of businesses. And other governments around the world are seeking to set up things like SBIR and STTR programs to help better support that part of the economy. So it is a very unique even thing that the US has that other countries don't really do.
Yeah, where did the microphone cube go?
So I guess one of the challenges I've seen people run into, and in fact, for 125K, it's a bit much to be asking for to define the future. And specifically what I'm talking about is the commercialization section requirement of these proposals. It gets musty in DOD, but then I read the NASA requirement and have seen comments back on other people's NASA proposal regarding the commercialization section. And so, you know, for 125K, I mean, it costs 30 grand to go do evaluation, which I think is actually a more valid way of, you know, I think that if somebody would say, okay, for commercialization, we propose to do evaluation in phase 2. Don't ask the phase 1 to predict the future concerning how the market is going to go, what the market is. That's just a bit much. So I think that section needs to be tossed or not evaluated that highly, because anything you put there short of a real technology evaluation is not going to make any sense anyway. So you can go look up, you know, 100 different types of market analyses. It is worthless. It's worth nothing until you actually do evaluation of the technology in the different markets, and you really don't have the money to really get to that until phase 2. So I think asking phase 1 applicants to write a commercialization section, that need to be looked at to try to reduce the weight of that and the scope of that, because it really makes no sense at all.
And I will apologize because I'm not as deeply familiar with the NASA proposal process, and Joseph's going to cover that in depth. But what I will say is that across the board, the requirements on phase 1 actually, it's about commercial potential, right? And there's an understanding that it is still phase 1. So I know that at various agencies, there isn't as much weight given to the commercialization section in a phase 1 application as there is in phase 2. But there is, you know, even it's not so much about predicting the future as it is about you're trying to put together your best case and as much evidence as you have about why you think this has any commercial potential. And so it's about trying to make that case to whoever the reviewers are as well, right? And so, you know, balancing, and I think that that fact is taken into consideration about sort of the stage that you're at.
Yeah, and Jennifer's absolutely correct. So for NASA, the SBIR phase 1, it's a consideration of thinking your plan. It's not specifically weighted. It's not weighted until the phase 2. A big part of our program is both a balance of commercialization as well as infusion, because we don't want you just to have one customer. Sometimes NASA missions, unfortunately, get canceled, you know, despite anything that we want to do or feedback from the SBIR program. So we want you guys to have a diverse portfolio.
And at many of the other agencies, so the National Science Foundation, for example, which might be a big resource for you guys here, they are not going to be the ultimate customer. And so commercialization means different things at different agencies, whereas at Department of Defense, they often are the ultimate customer, and so it's a different weighting. I did see a hand kind of at the same time as you, right back here. Kind of.
So anyway, just to finish up the question there, it's that people have been really dinged hard in the commercialization section for reviewers come back and say, you don't have a proper commercialization plan, or it's not deep enough. And the thing is, how can you do that to a phase 1 applicant when you so this is the problem, the struggle that I'm having, is that they're looking at that section too hard and in that level, and I think it's
yeah,
not right.
so
it's
I think that will be at an agency review level. Can I ask whoever it was that had their hand raised earlier right here, and then we'll get back to you? No? Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I guess it was similar to the cost stuff that I was mentioning earlier, that there are certain things that you are so early in your, I guess it's not a specific request, but maybe just a communication of how stuff works from our side. You are so early in an idea, and you believe on it, and you can technically demonstrate why it's good, and you could go as far as to say who would be interested in it. But for example, a recent proposal with NASA, SBIR, is like some stuff for trajectory optimization of spacecraft, right? Who is the customer? Well, NASA and anyone who has a spacecraft. What's the commercialization technology? Well, you develop the technology and you sell it. Any number that I put on it, any number that I say is I'm going to make $3 million in 7 years, is just a plain lie. And like I mean, there's no other way to say it.
No. So I mean, I think that's the thing. It's also, you know, it's almost like it's more about showing your work, about how are you thinking about the process of what kinds of partners are you going to need in your go-to-market strategy, and less about the specific numbers. But again, that gets to more specifically what is also being instructed to the reviewers and how to wait and look at that kind of information. I know that also for other agencies, people can volunteer to be reviewers, and it can be a valuable experience to understand what that technical review is like, and it's generally for the peer review type of agencies, so at NIH and NSF, for example.
Okay.
But but yes, I mean, it is an educational component for all the people who are involved, but the applicants to understand what the review criteria are, as well as for the reviewers in understanding how they should be looking at these things. So I saw another question in the back there.
Good. So I am actually new guy on the corner, and I don't have any clue because this is what I just. How much time I need to sort of plan to spend to write a proposal for phase 1? 1 month, 2 months, half a year, what?
So wait, so the first thing is that I would recommend, I didn't talk about it here, but for across all the agencies, you will be required to register through a number of systems, right? So you need to have a DUNS number, System for Award Management, SAM.gov, and SBIR.gov registry. And then from there, the different agencies have different requirements. But that part can take time because it's so definitely add that.
So what's the next?
Yes.
6 weeks minimum or maximum?
Minimum.
What's the maximum? What's the distribution curve?
6 weeks and if anything doesn't die, it's just lots of coffee.
Great. Any last, I think we got time for one more question. This is a fun microphone. Was that SBIR developed?
Yeah, this is awesome. So this is kind of just sort of build on that point and what you just made. Is there any effort going on right now to kind of consolidate the various registration systems to where you registered or submit a grant contract or whatever at one agency, the government automatically knows where you are basically and can just import that across different departments?
We are definitely talking about it. That part is going to be, and so SBIR.gov, right, attempts to collect all of this type of information across all the different agencies that participate in SBIR and STTR. But I wouldn't hold my breath about
so nowhere near someone trying to design like a unified user interface for this thing just yet or anything like that.
There were thoughts about it. But IT and the government, I will say, also needs a lot of innovation. Okay, oh, sorry, we are out of time, but I will be back here for lunch for a Q&A with the virtual folks, and so I'm sure we'll be able to answer some other questions there as well. So thank you. Oh, actually, one last word. If you already have an award, we are always looking for success stories to highlight, so come talk to me.